Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to start by introducing myself. My name is Soha Shalbini, and I am managing the corporate risk solutions at Bureau van Dijk, which is a Moody's analytics company. Today, I am here to speak about suppliers risk management. And of course, supplier risk management is a very wide topic. It could include supply chain risk, procurement risk, and purchasing risk. However, my focus today is on third-party risk. At Bureau van Dijk, we strongly believe that trade is no longer purely transactional, and it's essential to understand exactly who your third parties are. Basically, you need to know the details of the suppliers that you are dealing or trading with. Let's start by having a basic idea about the different risks that we can go through when dealing with a third party. So the types of risks. Let's start with this famous risk iceberg. If we start from the top to the bottom, the known knowns, which is basically the risk that we already know about our supplier, whether it's data or information that we already captured from the supplier, or it's based on our experience with the supplier. So this is risks that we are aware of. And then we have the known unknowns. So it's basically you might have some market feedback. So you have the supplier has a certain reputation, so you know about it, but you don't really know it. You're not really sure of that kind of risk. And then we have the unknown knowns, which is basically the information that's available about the supplier, whether it's with vendors or data providers, whether it's financial risk or information about the shareholders or compliance risk. So these risks or this information is available out there, but you don't have access to it. So you don't know it, you're not aware of it. And finally, the unknown unknowns, which is basically risks that we cannot predict, risks that we cannot assess. And the biggest example is COVID-19. So we don't know about this risk, we cannot predict it, but it happens. So these are the different levels of risks. So let's look at the different risk factors. I've started working in supplier risk since July 2018. I've met a lot of procurement professionals and supply chain professionals. And it has always been the same kind of risks or concerns or challenges that has been discussed or mentioned. And if we take a look at this, I'll just give you a brief about the different risks that has always been mentioned by these professionals. Delivery of the product, the quality of the product, the financial stability of the supplier. What if the supplier goes bankrupt? What if the key people I'm dealing with at the supplier leave the company? Regulatory risks, environmental risks, geopolitical risks, which we have a lot in our region here, spend control, prices, compliance issues, social responsibility, availability of the product, and performance. These are the most mentioned concerns or risks that most of the professionals I met has mentioned. Now let's try to put this a little bit into a better picture. Let's try to see how do they impact the business and what can we really predict and influence. So if we plot this into this graph, just to see what are the risks that we can predict and influence, you will be able to see that mostly risks that depend on our relationship with the supplier. So, or your experience with the supplier, so the delivery, the quality, the performance. So the more you deal with a supplier, the more you have information or you're able to predict if the supplier will really deliver on time, if the quality of the product is good, if in general their performance is good, and if you really have a performance score in your systems, then you'll be able to really track the performance of the supplier. Then if we look at the financial stability and the compliance issues, this is basically looking at the business continuity of a supplier. So you have to monitor their business continuity, whether by capturing their financial information or by monitoring them by using different tools and technologies that will help you understand the financial risks and reputational risks of a supplier. So now that we looked at this, we need to look at some facts just to understand how the disruption has been in the past years. So let's do this fact check. The first thing we can see here is basically the supply chain disruption. And this is since 2011 to 2019. The first thing we will notice here that it has always been high for tier 1 specifically. Now, with the COVID-19 and the disruption that happened in January, which we all know it started in China, it has been mentioned that the disruption in China would mostly affect the tier 3, tier 4, and beyond. So the first difference in this trend that we will see from 2020 going onward is that the numbers here will change. We will see an increase in tier 3 and tier 4 and beyond, and which means it's no longer only about tier 1. This is something that we really should keep in mind. Then if we look at the top right corner here, you'll be able to see that the number of respondents who never track the business continuity plans of key suppliers. You see that it's quite high in tier 4 and beyond, while it's very low in tier 1. So basically they are tracking the business continuity of tier 1 and tier 2, and they're not doing that with tier 3 and tier 4. And this also will change because now that we understand that there is more risk coming from tier 3 and tier 4, means we really need to start monitoring those. So again, that's another trend that we're expecting to see in the future. Then here at the bottom, we're able to see that the level of top management commitment to managing supply chain risk has been decreasing. So the high commitment from 2017 to 2019 actually decreased. So after what we experienced and after the COVID-19 and the huge disruption that we went through, I believe that the top management now understands the real impact of supply chain disruption on the business. And therefore, I really believe that this trend will change dramatically in the coming years. So this is an interesting understanding of the past trends. One of the other things that we looked at is that why don't professionals really monitor their suppliers? So the first two reasons here, the lack of time and lack of software, this is specifically a resources issue. So if they're under-resourced, they don't have the time to monitor all their suppliers, whether it's 1,000 or 10,000. If you don't have the right tools in place, then everything is going to be done manually, and therefore you do not have the time and the resources to perform the right monitoring of the suppliers. Then you have the not feeling the need to do so. And basically, I understand this from the perspective of if you're dealing with a supplier for a long period of time and you have a very good relationship with the supplier, then you won't really feel the need to monitor your supplier. However, that's not right because we've learned it the hard way. The world is so dynamic. Things change, like the world went upside down in a few days. So even if the relationship is strong with the supplier, it's important to monitor the business continuity of the supplier. And it's important to make sure that you have also other suppliers to the same material, or at least a plan B. So it's really important to have the right processes and tools in place to monitor the risk and to monitor the third parties that you are dealing with. Then the impact of COVID-19. 94% of the Fortune 1000 companies are seeing supply chain disruptions from COVID-19. 94%, that is huge. And then 75% of companies have had negative or strongly negative impact on their business. So this is how impactful is the supply chain disruption. It really impacts the business really hard. And then 55% of the companies plan to downgrade their growth outlooks. So even the growth plans has been affected dramatically with what's happened. So we have to understand that supply chain or supplier risk is tied closely to the business impact. It's important that we have the right tools, the right processes in place to make sure that we are able to anticipate, predict, and monitor these risks. How do we do that? Now that's the question. So there is basic steps that we have to put in place in order to at least have the basic risk management approach. So let's take a look at that. So the risk management approach. The first thing, you need to have a risk appetite. You need to understand as a company what's your goal when it comes to risk and what is the risk appetite of your organization. You have to have the right framework and process to continuously predict, assess, and manage the ongoing risks. If there is business and there is trade, then there is risks. That's it. So there will always be risks. It's just about how you are dealing with it. Are you able to anticipate it? Are you able to assess it? Do you have the right tools in place to take the right mitigation actions? Then incorporate technology solutions to optimize performance and help achieve expectations. Let's look at this in details. Define your risk appetite. So a recent survey showed that 89% of companies experienced a supplier risk event in the past 5 years. And the issues that most of these companies did lack the maturity to actually know about the risk and mitigate the risk. So most of these events were related to supplier financials, capacity, and compliance issues, which are three of the things that we said that we can anticipate and we can influence. It's important to have the right process in place in order to anticipate these risks and mitigate it. Now, most of these risks or events really require a rapid action in order to make sure that it does not impact the business. So the research shows that almost 2/3 of the companies do not immediately become aware of the issue and only react with delay, which complicates the situation. So it's really important to have your risk appetite defined in order to know what needs to be taken care of and in order to make sure that there are no delays when it's time to mitigate the risk. Then build a framework. So, and this could include also internal scoring models or performance cards of your suppliers. So basically you need to have a unit in place in the organization which are proactively managing the financial and operational risks. So this unit would be specialized into risk management. You should have a process in place and create a clear process on how to rapidly approach the risk and minimize the damage. And the largest example here is the COVID-19. So you have to address the active risks and take immediate actions. Then use the use the tools to help you anticipate and mitigate future risks. So example, supplier bankruptcy. If a supplier is going bankrupt and you're not aware of it and you get to know really late, then it's too late. But when you're able to anticipate through financial information that you have for the past, let's say 2, 3, or 4 years, you're able to anticipate that this supplier is going through some tough financial scores and that you need to have a plan B, because once they go bankrupt, that would be a huge risk for you. So this is just a small example, the screenshot of an internal score detail. So basically you can have your own internal score by scoring the profile of the supplier, like the legal status, the years of trading that they have, the legal form of the company, the number of employees, the turnover of the organization. And on the other hand, you can have the financial analysis, which will be based on financial information. And you have the behavioral analysis, which is based on your experience with the supplier. So if they had late deliveries, if the quality is not good, if the length of your relationship with that supplier, the compliance, if there's any compliance issues. So all of this together would give you a final score, whether it's a risky supplier or a healthy supplier. So these are some of the examples that it's good to know that you can have. Then incorporate technology. So based on this Gartner research here, it has shown that organizations that use technology to support risk are 64% more effective in addressing the risk, basically. So, and the ones that don't use technology are 34% only effective, while 66% moderately effective. So most of the leading organizations do have automated risk assessment and monitoring, while the decision-making process is supported with the data transparency, normalization, and relevant correlation. So it's important to understand that the functional leaders would be equipped with the best information to make quick and qualitative high-risk decisions. So for us, that's what we call the informed decision. The risk is going to be there, and you're going to take the decision anyway. But the difference is, are you informed before you're taking that decision? Do you have all the information and the data that you need in order to take the most relevant or the best decision? Or are you taking a decision without knowing the details of the supplier or the details of the supplier? So that's the important part, to have an informed decision. And once you identified your risk appetite and you have the right team in place with the right process and you have the right technologies and tools supporting you, you would have a strong base of the supplier management risk approach. And then it starts from there. Let's look at this example. So it's showing you the risk management maturity. And it's showing that 20% of the firms have an ad hoc, unstructured way to manage risk, while 50% of the firms are reactive. They just react to the risk when it happens, which in most of the cases, it's too late. The risk has happened, too late to mitigate it, and the loss happens. 25% of the firms are proactive, so they're able to anticipate the risk and they manage it by having a dedicated procurement employees. And then 5% of the firms, they have a cross-functional risk management approach. So they have the involvement of cross functions along the risk management value chain managed by dedicated supply chain risk management units. So the question is, where do you stand today? What's your maturity level? Do you have a risk appetite in place? Is it defined? Do you have the right processes and the right team in place? And are you really using the right tools and technologies that will help you anticipate the risks that we can influence? Once you're able to answer these questions, you should be able to put the plan going forward to see how you can have the best risk management approach. We strongly believe at BVD that the right tools provide enough structured information to make positive identifications based on the balance of probability and your risk appetite. I hope you found this session beneficial. Feel free to ask any questions in the Q&A tab. And we appreciate if you can just answer some of the poll questions that are following this session in order to understand your current risk appetite. Thank you very much for your time.